so I have to let loose my inner rage for this one. Well, you know what? Bring it on. If you remember back in January, I dedicated 5 countdowns to the classic Megaman series. Now it's finally time to take it a step further and talk about the Megaman X series. In the X series, the stories are expanded upon, the characters are expanded upon, the gameplay is given a serious upgrade over the classic series, and the robot masters of this series, the Mavericks, are for the most part pretty sweet. However, like the classic series, the X series is no stranger to bad robots, and unfortunately, because there's more to love in Mavericks, that also means there's more to hate in them. So I'm here to count down my top 15 worst Mavericks in the series. And do keep in mind, every main series X game will be represented at least once on this list. So with all that out of the way, let's roll! As was the case with my least favorite Robot Masters list, because I'm representing every X game once here, I have to give some flack to my favorite in the series, Megaman X3. X3 has to have my favorite lineup of Mavericks out of any X game, but definitely the weakest of the bunch is Tunnel Rhino. Don't get me wrong, Tunnel Rhino is not a bad Maverick, not even close, but he's definitely not the best he could have been. But before we go over wasted potential, let's go over what he did right. Let's start with that sweet design. He's a Rhino with tractors for feet and drills all over his body. He's basically Ground Man if he were a Maverick, and that's pretty cool. Also, his weapon, the Tornado Fang, is actually really useful, as it deals multiple hits while immobilizing enemies. So, where does he go wrong? Well, let's look at his stage. It looks like some tunneling mine, and that's basically it. The enemies aren't really all that interesting, minus the annoying drill tanks and the mini-boss, which is actually kind of a pain. The sandfalls are never a threat, and the rockfalls are easy to avoid, except for this part. The stage feels really basic and honestly, kinda boring. However, the thing that really gets to me is his fight. All he really does is charge back and forth, occasionally stopping to do a fake out attack, and occasionally shooting drills. But it's not exciting, it's just dull. His desperation attack doesn't even do that much aside from make him invulnerable. So yeah, Tunnel Rhino is definitely the weakest Maverick in X3 for me, and it definitely shows how great the roster is if this is its weakest member. Now let's move on to the one that started it all, and my second favorite in the series, the original Megaman X. Like X3, X1 has a fantastic lineup of Mavericks. However, unlike X3, the worst of the bunch for me sticks out like a sore thumb, and that would be Sting Chameleon. This guy honestly bothers me in several areas. However, like Tunnel Rhino, I can praise his design. I've always liked Chameleons, and they really went all the way with this design, and it looks great. However, his stage really isn't all that great. It's set in what looks like some kind of jungle, and that's about it. Seriously, there isn't much that's memorable about the stage besides the mini-boss guarding the armor upgrade. The enemy selection is a bit dull, and none of the enemies unique to this stage are memorable or a threat in the slightest. When you compare this to other stages in X1, it just comes up flat and unmemorable. But what really gets to me about Chameleon is his fight, because he's a serious nuisance. He's a chameleon and he does what you'd expect, blend into his surroundings. While he's out of sight, you can't hit him. He'll only reveal himself when he attacks, and you'll often shoot too early and just miss him, or too late when he's just started to fade. His attacks include a spread of stings, an incredibly fast tongue lashing, and an attack where he latches onto the ceiling by his tongue, somehow, to drop spikes from the ceiling which are next to impossible to avoid. At the very least, the weapon you get is pretty sweet. The uncreatively named Chameleon Sting has good range and makes you invisible when charged. But still, when you consider the amazing roster that X1 had, this reptile just doesn't belong with them. Now let's move on to the Quarter Guy approved Megaman X4, and a Maverick I'm honestly quite split on. Yeah, I said it, I don't like Split Mushroom. This guy's honestly quite the mixed bag for me, and it's something I really can't ignore. First off, I don't know what to think of his design. I mean, a mushroom for a Maverick is something unique I guess, but I can't tell if it's something unique or something stupid. His stage is also something I'm seriously split on. There are things I like, but also things I can't stand. I do like the first half of the stage and the hectic yet incredibly easy mini-boss. However, it's the second half that bothers me. Enemies can fly at you fast from out of nowhere on the stair climb, and the elevator ride is so freaking slow, and the lack of enemies besides the easy to dodge vines ends up boring me. One thing I'm not split on though is his fight, because like Sting Chameleon, he's a complete nuisance. He'll start off by summoning silhouettes to rush you, and when that's done, he'll create a clone and start, whoa! Are we sure this guy isn't Gemini Man's second cousin? Yeah, this attack may seem easy to avoid, but the real fungus speeds up as he takes damage, leading to situations where damage is nearly inevitable. I will give Mushroom this though, his weapons are amazing. X gets the Soul Body, which creates a silhouette capable of absorbing shots and killing enemies, and Zero gets hooked up with a double jump and a rolling slash, and that is sweet. Unfortunately, Split Mushroom ends up being quite the mixed bag that I honestly wish I could like more. I'll be honest, I'm not really a big fan of Megaman X2. While far from a bad game, it felt like a huge step back from X1. It doesn't feel as refined, and the Maverick lineup is honestly kind of weak. I may get some flack for this, but I'm sticking Wheel Gator on here. His design may be cool, honestly he's one of the best looking Mavericks in X2, but things go downhill pretty fast from there. Let's look at his stage. It's some sort of dinosaur tank, but honestly, it's pretty forgettable. There are basically no platforming challenges in the slightest, leaving the challenge of the stage up to the enemies, which all go down pretty easily. Not to mention, this stage has some of the most annoyingly placed upgrades I have ever seen. The Rhino armor isn't even used that effectively because you only have it for about 30 seconds to a minute, and in all seriousness, it doesn't feel like it needs to be there. After a stage like that, you probably expect a frantic fight, but instead, we get the complete opposite, a tedious fight. The Gator spends most of the fight submerged in the muck in the arena where you can't hit him. He'll send up blades to try and slice you, and also jump you to try and munch on your sorry butt. You can also drill into a wall to make parts of it hazardous, and even eat your shots to send them right back at you. This fight takes a while, and it feels more like a test of patience rather than a test of skill. Hence my nickname for it, Wheel Tedium. The weapon you get for beating him is meh. It shoots a bladed wheel that can carve through certain terrain, but its uses are pretty limited outside of that. That just goes to show, you can't have a Maverick look cool and expect it to be enough. Whenever I fight him, I just want to shred him up and be done with it. Now for the game I'm sure most Mega Man fans are unfamiliar with, Mega Man X8. After the atrocity that was the previous installment, fans had lost hope in the series, and this game suffered as a result. A darn shame too, because despite its poor sales, it's one of the strongest games in the series for me. However, its Maverick lineup is definitely not one of the strongest I've seen, and this definitely shows with number 11 on this list, Gigabolt Manowar. Or Gigavolt Manowar, I don't know. It's sad because I really wanted to like this guy. His design is, at the very least, pretty interesting. However, everything else about the Snipedarian just falls flat. When you enter a stage, you notice immediately that it's a ride chaser stage, and that's not a good sign. And unfortunately, it's not one of the good ones. The whole point of this stage is to shoot Manowar enough times to bring him down. This wouldn't be so bad, except this stage just screams bad design. It's incredibly difficult and awkward to judge the positioning on the signs you're supposed to avoid. Manowar can shoot jellyfish to block your shots, and will often speed away when you try to shoot him. The idea is to grab the boost power-ups around the stage to chase them down, except that they're small, and like I said before, it's difficult to judge the position on the signs to avoid them. Also, you have to take down Manowar in 2 laps, otherwise you have to start all over again. After that nightmare, you actually fight Manowar, and the fight is decent at best. He'll float in the air for most of the fight, attempting to fly into you, try and zap you, send jellyfish after you, and attack with his arms. And for his overdrive, he'll zap parts of the platform, and trust me, that will hurt if it connects. The fight is alright, but I wish it was more exciting. It's just average. At least you get some cool weapons, being electrically charged, and all of them being pretty powerful. But still, this floating wall of jelly really isn't all that great. I'll see myself out with that one. Alright, now we get to talk about the underdog in the series, Mega Man X5. This is honestly one of the most underrated games I've seen, and it baffles me as to why. The gameplay is still solid, the soundtrack is awesome as per usual, and a lot of the level designs were pretty interesting. However, I won't ignore that this game has problems. Its Maverick lineup, while okay, doesn't match up to others, and the worst of the bunch for me sticks out, Duff McWhalen. Now at first glance, this Maverick doesn't seem that bad. He has an interesting design, and a name that honestly makes me chuckle. But when you step into a stage, then we have problems. It's a water stage, something the X-Series is known for doing surprisingly well, but once you start, you notice an inherent problem. It's an auto-scrolling level. That's right, you take this entire level at a snail's pace. During the stage, the submarine will constantly be on your butt attacking you with lasers and missiles, and you have to fight the thing a total of 3 times. Yet ironically, I don't hate the stage because it's frustrating. I hate it for being boring. The stage tends to drag, especially with the 3 force mini-bosses, and if you want the Falcon armor piece, you have to play through this stage twice. When you finally get to McMillan, he puts up a semi-decent fight. It starts off fine. He sticks to one side of the arena shooting blocks of I don't know what at you, but when most of his health is gone, he'll switch sides and shoot blocks at an increased rate, which wouldn't be a problem if the side he's shooting towards didn't have spikes on it. The battle quickly becomes a frantic race against time, hoping you can kill the whale before your turn into Swiss cheese. As for weapons, X gets the Goo Shaver, which is pretty much a nerfed version of the Ground Hunter from X4, while Zero gets a weaponized Air Dash, which you'll often forget is actually an attack. And to think, the best thing about this Maverick is his funny name. Okay, hear me out. I don't hate Megaman X6. It's a flawed game for sure, with its ridiculous level design and often cheap difficulty, but I can't find myself hating this game for some reason. Maybe it's because conquering those challenges can be pretty satisfying. However, I would probably like this game more if it didn't have such a poor lineup of Mavericks. And why don't we start with the Maverick that actually tries to defend itself? Shield Sheldon. And he's lame. I mean, his design is based on a clam. A clam! How is that threatening or creative in the slightest? I wish that were the end of his problems, but oh man, he has worse. His stage for one can be a serious pain. You have to traverse invisible platforms, which they do mark for you, and deal with rotating mirrors to get lasers to open the way. Thing is, this stage can be quick and painless if you decide to just go for Sheldon. But if you decide to go the alternate route, which you probably will want to do because there's an armor piece there, you have to deal with a bunch of invisible platforms, annoyingly placed enemies, and a long and annoying laser redirection room. Also, the armor piece is hidden behind a fake wall. How are we supposed to know that? But I'll give him this. His fight isn't too bad. It's nothing special, but I can stomach it fine. He'll chuck his shells which block shots, bounce around which is surprisingly easy to avoid, create a clone and throw his shells, and when he's low on health, create shields on all sides. It can be a bit of a pain, but I've seen worse. However, his weapon has basically no use. It's supposed to absorb projectiles and retaliate with shots, but it doesn't work on everything, and the time it takes to use it, you can just kill the enemies with another weapon anyway. So yeah, Sheldon, you should stick to hiding in your shell. We'll all be better off. When you judge a Maverick, the first thing you usually look at is their design, as it can set the precedent for what to expect from the Maverick. So when you play through X2 and see a snail Maverick, you don't expect much from it. And honestly, you'd be right, because Crystal Snail hardly delivers. I will give him this though. I get a kick out of his stage. It's some sort of crystal mine with slippery slopes that are fun to mess with, a ride armor that's actually put to good use, and some really cool music. Unfortunately, this is about the only thing that the snail can do right. When you get to him and see his intro animation take as long as it does, your expectations for the fight bog down, and he can't even meet those. He'll constantly hide in his shell to block attacks, spit shots that crystallize you, bounce around for an absurd amount of time, and even slow time. But what really bugs me about this fight is that it's one of only 2 cases in the X series I've ever broken my tradition. Let me explain. In the Classic and X series, I'm dedicated to beat the Robot Master or Maverick with only the Buster or Z-Saber when I fight them in their stage for a challenge, and then use their weakness on the mandatory rematches to plow through them. Here, nah-ah. The fight is way too long, tedious, and boring for me to even consider trying. And his weapon, the Crystal Hunter, next to worthless. It encases enemies in crystal. Nothing less, nothing more. I'll stick to the weapons I like, and Crystal Snail should stick to sticking on sticks. I've always been a huge fan of phoenixes and how they're portrayed, especially in video games, being omnipowerful birds reborn from their own ashes. So might I ask, why did X6 take this awesome concept and completely botch it? Blaze Heatnix is a terrible portrayal of this awesome creature. His design is awesome, but pretty much everything else sucks. Need examples? Oh, I got plenty. The problems with this stage start as soon as you enter. You drop down, and you have to kill a giant red donut. Sounds easy, right? Wrong! This thing is a serious nuisance, especially given how small the area is. And maybe there's only one of those. Maybe the rest of the stage isn't so bad. You wish! You have to fight a total of 5 of these things throughout the stage, each with varying levels of annoyance. And when you're not dealing with them, you have a bunch of annoying placed enemies in a room full of fire jets that can really hurt if they hit you. Ironic as it sounds though, his fight is laughably easy. He brings in some purple lava and dives into it. Then he'll rise back up and shoot easily avoidable lava balls which can be destroyed if you so choose. Seriously, the lava itself is more of a threat than Heatnix himself could ever hope to be. Even when he has the lava come down from the ceiling and somehow not touch the floor, he's still pathetic because he's leaving himself wide open to attack. In terms of weapons, X gets the Magma Blade, which is a fire blade that shoots fireballs, and Zero gets an upwards fire slash. Both weapons are decent, but nothing I rely on. This is one Phoenix I seriously hope stays as Ashes. So we finally come to the worst X2 has to offer. This game could have been an amazing follow-up to X1 with an equally creative Maverick lineup, but instead, we get Mavericks like this. Seriously, Capcom? Wire Sponge? It's not enough that we have a Maverick based off a snail, but a sponge? Are you for real? That design's not creative, not interesting, it's just dull and uninspired. Oh hey, nice segue, because those words describe his stage flawlessly. This is the stage I always go after first, and not just because of the easy to grab hard tank and sub tank, because even without special weapons, this stage doesn't challenge me at all. The only real gimmick, if you want to call it that, is the changing weather, which does basically nothing. Even the wind is barely noticeable and hardly hampers your progress, and you'll only die from it if you're supremely reckless. And unfortunately, the words dull and uninspired seem to be a recurring theme for this Maverick, because his fight is just that. He'll stick to the ceiling and try to plant vines to hamper you, which they probably would if they weren't so easily destroyed. He'll try and hit you with his easily predictable leaf throwing, and try to zap you with easily avoidable lightning strikes. And if you haven't noticed, this fight is hardly a challenge at all. All of his attacks are easy to deal with, and even on my first playthrough, I destroyed him easily. And for his weapon, if you haven't picked up on the pattern yet, it's pretty much worthless in combat, and you'll only really use it to get a few upgrades and to beat the Sigma virus. I really wish more effort went into this game. It had so much potential. Well, you all knew this one was coming eventually. The atrocity that is Megaman X7. This is one of the worst games I have ever played in my life, and this game legit made me angry. Not angry like frustrated, angry like angry, and for me, that's very hard to do. And without a shadow of a doubt, this game has the absolute worst lineup of Mavericks in the series. I can't believe Capcom made these Mavericks. Like really, Snipe, Anteater? You base a Maverick off a freaking Anteater and expect it to be cool? I got news for you, it's not. His design is generic and not interesting in the slightest. His stage looks like it's set in cyberspace. This sounds like it'd be a cool concept, except, much like many of the ideas brought forth in X7, it was botched completely. You constantly flip upside down to traverse the stage, and not only does it make controlling your hunter extremely difficult, but it's also so disorienting. Not to mention, you have to use Axel's clunky copy ability on one of the enemies in this stage to save a lot of the Reploids. I'm not kidding when I say this stage legit gave me a headache when I suffered through it. It's a pain to navigate, and the color scheme just makes it worse. Too bad it only gets worse from here because his fight is massively frustrating. He'll fire off attacks while he circles around the cylinder you're standing on, which he has full range of motion on by the way, while you can only stick to the top of it. His attacks include waves of energy, ant bombs, and incredibly annoying seeker missiles. Bear in mind, he can easily stick to the bottom of the cylinder and fire these attacks while you can't hit him. So we take Axel divided by 0, multiply it by a sniper to the power of Sigma, which equals a cheap challenge. Even when you use X's charge shots which pass through walls, he's still a pain because he doesn't know how to stay still. The weapon you get is, rather predictably, a seeking missile, which sounds awesome, except it's weak and doesn't help when you're surrounded. You know this Maverick is bad when they misspell Anteater in his name. Seriously, how in the world do you mess that up? It's Anteater! God, I'm not even done yet. Hey guys, did you know that Burner Man had a cousin? Yeah, Burn Rooster is essentially Burner Man in Maverick form, complete with all his problems, only worse. However, like Burner Man, I can compliment his design. I mean, Fire Kung Fu Chicken is pretty sweet, but sadly, that's about the only thing I can say about him in a positive light. His stage takes place in an incineration plant and is very poorly designed. You start off with an auto-scrolling segment where you have to jump from platform to platform in time. If you go too slow, you'll get hurt and lose medals. Too quick, you'll die, and believe me, that's easy to do. After that, you have an incredibly annoying passage with bats everywhere and enemies with freezing guns for some reason, I don't know. And also spikes. Everywhere. You have to be spot on with wall jumping, otherwise you're gonna get poked and die. And after that annoyance, oh great, another auto-scrolling segment. Yep, you have another one of these auto-scrolling segments, and it's even worse because there's a ton of explosive crates and lasers which can really hurt if you're not careful. And need I remind you, you have to be very careful in order to avoid dying. And if this stage didn't get you burning with rage, don't worry, he's got you covered with his fight. He'll be in the air for most of the fight, coming down to attack with either pillars of flame or a kick that rebounds off the walls. However, because you can only deal so much damage at once and he's in the air a lot, dealing damage without getting hurt in the process without using Axel or his weakness is tricky to say the least, but his overdrive makes things worse. Why? Well, he breathes fire to create giant flame pillars on both sides of the arena that stay there for the entire second half of the fight, effectively turning the fight into a seriously dangerous cage match. And bear in mind, he's completely immune to damage during his overdrive. The fight is ultimately incredibly frustrating and annoying, much like his stage. And they have the gall to make you have to escape the area with rising magma after the fight before you're able to complete the stage. And maybe this would be worth it if you got some neat weapons, but nope. Zero gets a fiery downward stab, which can't be influenced in midair by the way. X gets the Melt Creeper, which is slow and really only effective on grounded enemies, and Axel gets a flamethrower, which would be nice, except it's slow and has limited range. I just want this chicken cooked with my rage so I can move on. I tried to like X6's roster, I really did. And when you have a Maverick based off a dung beetle, a Maverick based off a water flea that can survive extreme conditions doesn't sound like a bad idea, but oh man, Infinity Magician is easily the worst Maverick in X6. Why, you may ask? Because he ranks a 32,000 out of 10 on the annoyance scale. When you first enter his stage, oh man, giant robot and it wants me dead. Yeah, this robot is a constant presence throughout the stage. It's not too bad in the beginning as its shots are easy to avoid, but in the second half it gets infuriating. Its attack is really annoying to dodge and you constantly have to deal with death pits and annoyingly placed enemies. And if you decide to go the alternate route, you have a bunch of poorly placed Reploids with nightmares ready to grab them, all floating above a bottomless pit with vertical cables. Yep, as if it wasn't bad enough, you have to be more careful than usual to avoid falling to your death upon missing a cable. When you actually do manage to get to him, you'd think that this little flea can't put up much of a fight, but he puts up one of the most annoying fights I've ever seen. You see, when you hit him, he'll fly backward and leave a clone behind, and these clones can all attack with bubbles while the real flea can attack with lasers and energy balls. So the battle quickly becomes a war of attrition with the choice of dealing with the clones or hunting down the real Magician only for him to make more clones. Every time I fight him, I can only hope I outlast him. As for weapons, X gets the Ray Arrow, which is mediocre unless charged, and Zero gets the most broken Giga Attack ever, which is nice, but it doesn't come close to a redeeming quality. He's called Infinity Magician for a reason. He makes you infinitely frustrated. How is this a thing? Legit, how is a freaking Wallaby a Maverick? I can't believe this was allowed past conception, or how this was even conceived in the first place. But if you think the only thing wrong with this Maverick is its stupid and uninspired design, you know nothing. Let's look at that stage of his. It starts off in some sort of cave, then goes into some kind of mechanical area with deadly acid. You can pick up a ride armor here, and it sucks. Seriously, this ride armor is one of, if not the worst in the series. It's clunky and awkward as heck to control, and barely does anything besides let you traverse the acid to save the Reploids. But you know what? That's not the biggest problem with the stage. The biggest problem is that it severely overstays its welcome. There are 4 segments of the stage, none of them are short, and there's long load times between each of them. And when you finally, huge emphasis on finally, get to him, you're not gonna have a fun time. The first phase of this slogfest is pathetically easy because his mech is a huge and slow target, and the second phase can be long and annoying. The Wallaby jumps all over the place like he's hopped up on caffeine and sugar, and because of the god-awful camera in this game, it's tough to keep track of him, let alone dodge his attacks. And his weapon? It's an explosion. It's tiny and worthless. But you know what the absolute worst part of this is? There's a Maverick that's even worse. I'm not even going to try and build this one up. You all know what the worst Maverick in the series is. Without a doubt, Flame Hyaenard is the worst Maverick ever to be seen in the X series. Look at that design. It's bad enough that X7 went with such uninspired choices as an Anteater and a Wallaby for the roster, but a hyena? Really? He barely looks like a hyena. He looks like some kind of mechanical dog crossed with a flamethrower, but it gets even worse than just his design. His stage is one of the most frustrating levels I have ever had the displeasure of going through. The first half has a ton of flying enemies and bombs, which I swear are incredibly inconsistent with when they decide they want to go off. And guess what? There are Reploids near these bombs, meaning you either have to be patient and figure out how to avoid setting them off, or you're completely screwed. And believe me, that's not easy. I've tried just creeping up to them, but more often than not, I'll get unlucky and they'll go off anyway, or an enemy will blindside me and I'll get knocked into the range enough for one to be set off. And believe it or not, the second half is even worse. It's bad enough that you have the awful camera I mentioned earlier, but when you have to deal with tough enemies that can easily knock you into the lava and kill you, you're gonna have a hard time getting through this. And let me remind you, you still have Reploids that you have to save, and there's so many ways that they can get killed. The stage leaves a bad enough impression, but the fight with him makes it worse. When it starts, 2 clones of Hyanard will come at you shooting flames, but you're not supposed to hit them. Oh no, they're just a distraction. The Hyanard you're aiming for is on top of the Mechanoid, but if you try and shoot him from the shoulders, he'll be attacking with fire shots and the Mechanoid will constantly be shooting missiles. You'd probably think he'd be easier to hit from the Mechanoid's back, but man, is that a mistake! When you're on his back, he'll summon his clones and begin to circle you while constantly shooting fire while missiles rain down on you. And don't think you can just escape. If you try, they'll tackle you, which doesn't hurt, but it pushes you back. Remember I said Crystal Snail was one of 2 Mavericks I ever broke tradition on? Yeah? Well, Hyanard is the other. The best strategy, which you should use, is to just use Zero's version of his weakness. But that doesn't get rid of the worst part of this fight. Hyanard's constant screaming.
Burn to the ground! 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 Burn to the ground!
There is no Maverick worse than this. Horrible design, a horrendously designed stage, a cheap fight which pretty much mandates his weakness, weapons that are completely worthless, and the fact that this Maverick leaves scars on those who ever face him. I'm Arrow Dragon, and never forget what Capcom did here. Oh man, that felt good to get off my chest, and I really hope you enjoyed this list. And if you haven't yet, give the Megaman X series a shot. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'm hoping to get out one more list before I head back to school, so stay tuned for my top 15 games I played in 2015. See you guys next time, take care.